For 3 straight weeks, the dripping faucet in our kitchen had been driving me out of my mind. At 2 a.m, I lay awake in the dark, listening to that relentless drip, 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 while my husband, Caleb Harlan, pretended to sleep beside me. The sound echoed through our polished suburban house like a countdown, cold, steady, impossible to ignore. I did what I had always done when something broke. I got out of bed to fix it. My name is Ella Harlan. I inspect houses for a living. I find hidden damage, trace cracks back to their source, and spot problems most people miss. That is probably why the lie in my marriage had started to feel louder than that faucet. Some things leak slowly before they collapse. Some things rot behind clean paint and pretty walls. The kitchen was dark, except for the pale streetlight spilling through the window. I grabbed my toolbox, knelt by the sink, and let my hands work on instinct. A worn washer, a simple repair, 5 minutes at most. The kind of problem with an honest cause and an honest solution. Then I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked at the microwave clock, 2:47 a.m. Caleb had left around 11, telling me he had to meet a client about urgent paperwork. He worked in real estate, polished suits, easy smiles, the kind of charm people trusted too quickly. But real estate emergencies on a Tuesday night did not usually come home wearing another person's perfume. The front door opened softly, carefully, like he was hoping the house itself would keep his secret. A second later, his shoes crossed the hardwood floor. "Ella?" he called, his voice low and smooth. "You awake, babe?" "In the kitchen," I said, tightening my grip on the wrench, fixing the leak. He stepped into the doorway, and even in the dim light, something in me went still. His hair looked finger-combed instead of styled. His tie was gone. His lips were dry, like they had been kissed clean, and under the cool October air clinging to his coat was the unmistakable scent of a woman's perfume. Expensive, floral, intimate. Not mine. "You didn't have to wait up," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. I looked at him then, really looked at him. In that moment, with my hands wet from sink water and my heart beating too hard in my chest, I did not yet know how badly my life was about to split open. But I knew one thing. The faucet was not the only thing in this house that had been leaking for a long time. I was 38 when I finally admitted to myself that love could survive for years on routine, long after truth had already left the room. Caleb and I had been married for 12 years, together for 15. We met in the least romantic way possible, during a property inspection gone sideways. I had been hired to inspect a newly renovated colonial on the edge of town, and he was the listing agent, trying very hard to keep the nervous buyers calm while I pointed out everything the sellers hoped nobody would notice. "This floor slopes more than it should," I had said, crouching near the dining room archway. Caleb stood beside me in a navy suit, smiling that polished, disarming smile of his. "Is that the official diagnosis, or are you just trying to ruin my sale?" I glanced up at him. "I don't ruin sales. I ruin lies." He laughed then, warm, easy, confident. "Good to know. Remind me never to lie to you." Back then, that line had sounded charming. He was handsome in the kind of way people noticed immediately. Dark hair, clean jawline, expensive shoes. A voice that could make ordinary words sound like promises. Women trusted him. Men wanted to be him. He knew how to walk into a room and make it feel as if the room had been waiting for him all day. I was different, less polished, more grounded. I liked clear answers, working heat registers, level foundations, and coffee strong enough to stand up on its own. I was not flashy. I was observant, practical. The kind of woman who believed stability was not boring, it was earned. Maybe that was why Caleb fascinated me. He pursued me with patience at first, not aggressively, not arrogantly, just steadily. He brought me coffee to inspection sites. He remembered details I mentioned in passing. He listened. Or at least, he performed listening well enough that I believed I had been seen. On our 4th date, he took me to a quiet little restaurant by the river, Nothing trendy, nothing loud. Candlelight flickered against the glass, and outside the dark water moved without sound. "You're hard to impress," he said, smiling across the table. "I'm not hard to impress," I replied. "I'm hard to fool." He held my gaze for a second too long, then reached for my hand. "That may be exactly why I like you." At the time, I thought that meant we were building something honest. For a long while, it felt that way. The first years of our marriage were not dramatic. They were good in the ordinary, comforting ways that matter more than grand gestures. Saturday mornings with coffee on the porch, shared grocery lists on the fridge, my boots by the back door, his suit jackets hanging in the laundry room because he never put them where they belonged. We learned each other's rhythms. He liked the television on low when he fell asleep. I liked silence. He forgot where he put his keys. I forgot to eat lunch when work got busy. He kissed my forehead whenever he passed behind me in the kitchen. I used to think that meant safety. We talked about kids the way couples talk about vacations they assume they have time to take. Someday, when things slow down, after the market settles, after the next promotion, after the next year. Someday became one of those words that sounds hopeful until it turns into a graveyard. There were good years, real ones. I do not tell this story as a woman who was miserable from the beginning and simply failed to see it. That would be easier, cleaner. But the truth is harder than that. I loved him, deeply, patiently, in the unglamorous ways that marriages are actually built, through loyalty, repetition, forgiveness, and choosing the same person over and over again. That is why the betrayal cut where it did. Not because I loved a fantasy, but because I had loved a real man and believed he was loving me back with the same steadiness. Still, looking back, there were signs. Not dramatic ones at first, just little things that passed through my mind and disappeared before I could pin them down. Caleb had always cared about his appearance, but around 6 months earlier, it shifted into something sharper. New shirts, better cologne, longer gym sessions. He started checking himself in reflective surfaces when he thought no one was watching. His phone, once casually tossed on the counter or couch, began living face down. Weekend client meetings became more frequent. Dinners ran later. Explanations got smoother. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But noticing is not the same as accepting. Part of me blamed stress. The housing market had turned competitive and ugly. He was chasing bigger listings, wealthier clients, faster commissions. Real estate was a performance business, and Caleb had always known how to perform. I told myself that was all this was: pressure, exhaustion, midlife vanity, the kind of drift marriages go through when both people are too tired to say what they really mean. His family did not help. His mother, Diane, had never openly disliked me, but she had spent 12 years mastering the art of disappointment disguised as concern. "Ella is very capable," she would say at family dinners, smiling tightly. "Not every man is comfortable being married to a woman so independent." Or, "You work such long hours, dear. I do hope Caleb doesn't get lonely while you're off climbing through attics and crawl spaces." Always polite, always deniable, always aimed to leave a mark. His younger sister, Vanessa, was softer on the surface, but just as intrusive. She treated marriage like a brand partnership, and Caleb like a prize that needed constant admiration. If he forgot an anniversary plan, I should have reminded him. If he seemed tired, I should create more peace at home. If we grew distant, surely the answer had something to do with me being too practical, too busy, too serious. I learned to smile through it, to let the comments pass, to tell myself families come with rough edges. Caleb rarely defended me in ways that mattered. Sometimes he would squeeze my knee under the table or say, "Mom, don't start." But it was never enough to stop anything, never enough to make them understand that I was his wife, not an applicant being reviewed for the role. And yet I stayed loyal to him, to the marriage, to the life we had built. Because that is the dangerous thing about slow betrayal. It does not burst through the front door all at once. It enters politely. It takes off its shoes. It sits in your living room for months while you convince yourself nothing is wrong, even as the air keeps changing. So by the time I was kneeling on that kitchen floor at almost 3 a.m, with a fixed faucet in one hand and the smell of another woman on my husband's coat, the truth had not arrived out of nowhere. It had been approaching me for a long time. I had just finally stopped looking away. The morning after I fixed the faucet, the house felt too quiet, not peaceful, just hollow. The silence pressed against my ears in a way that made me miss the dripping. At least that sound had been honest. It told me something was wrong. Now everything looked perfect again, and that was what made it worse. Caleb came downstairs like nothing had changed. Freshly showered, crisp shirt, that same effortless confidence wrapped around him like a second skin. He kissed my cheek as he passed, casual, practiced. "Morning, babe." "Morning," I replied, watching him pour coffee. His movements were smooth, efficient, no hesitation, no guilt in his posture. If I hadn't been standing there the night before, if I hadn't smelled it, I might have believed him. "You heading out early?" he asked. "Got a full schedule," I said. 3 inspections today." "Busy as always," he smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Try not to scare too many buyers away." I gave a small smile back. "I don't scare them. I tell them the truth." For a split second, something flickered across his face. Then it was gone. That flicker stayed with me long after he left. By mid-morning, I was at my first inspection, standing in a half-finished basement explaining moisture issues to a young couple who kept nodding like they understood more than they did. "And if you look here," I said, pointing at the foundation wall, "you can see where the seepage—" My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. Work had always been my anchor. When something didn't make sense emotionally, I leaned into what I could measure, test, confirm. Wood rot didn't lie. Cracked beams didn't pretend. Structural problems didn't gaslight you into thinking they weren't there. But that day, my focus kept slipping. Every time I bent down to examine something, I found myself thinking about Caleb's shirt from the night before. The way his collar had been slightly wrinkled, the faint smudge near the cuff, the smell that wasn't mine. By the time I finished the inspection, I had repeated the same explanation twice without realizing it. The couple exchanged a glance. "You okay?" the woman asked gently. I straightened, forcing a professional smile. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well." That part, at least, was true. Around noon, I pulled into our driveway to grab a different set of tools. And that's when I saw Mrs. Fielder, 73 years old, always at her mailbox. Always watching everything without looking like she was watching anything. "Ella, dear," she called, her voice bright with that familiar mix of warmth and curiosity. "Morning, Mrs. Fielder. Beautiful day, isn't it?" "It is," I said, forcing lightness into my tone. She shuffled a little closer, lowering her voice as if the hedges might be listening. "You know, I was up quite late last night. Old bones don't sleep like they used to." I paused, my hand resting on the van door. "Oh?" "And I happened to see Caleb coming home." My stomach tightened. "He looked a bit flushed," she continued carefully. "And that young woman who dropped him off seemed very concerned about him." I didn't move. "Woman?" I asked, keeping my voice as even as I could. "Mm-hmm," she nodded, eyes soft but sharp underneath. "Very pretty, dark hair, drove one of those sleek little cars. Not the kind you see around here often." My fingers curled slightly against the metal of the van. "I'm sure it was work," I said. "Of course," she replied immediately, her tone gentle. "I'm sure it was." But she didn't look convinced. "And you know," she added, almost as an afterthought, "I've seen that same car a few times over the past months. Always late, always dropping him off." There it was. Not new, not a one-time mistake. A pattern. "Such dedication, these young professionals," she said, patting my arm, "working all hours." I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I murmured. Dedication. She gave me one last knowing look before shuffling back toward her house. And just like that, the quiet doubt inside me turned into something heavier, sharper, harder to ignore. That evening, Caleb was attentive, too attentive. He cooked dinner, my favorite. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, the kind of meal he usually claimed he didn't have time for. He asked about my day. He listened, really listened, or at least performed it convincingly. But his phone never left his hand for long. Every few minutes, his eyes flicked toward it. When it buzzed during dessert, he reached for it so fast it was almost instinct. "Sorry," he said, glancing at the screen. His lips curved slightly. "Work?" I asked. "Yeah," he replied quickly. "Just some contract adjustments." He typed something back, then set the phone face down. Face down. Another small detail that had become normal without me noticing when it started. "I might have to step out later," he added casually. "Client needs something finalized tonight." "Tonight?" I repeated. "It's Wednesday." He shrugged lightly. "When people are ready to buy, they don't wait for the calendar." Then he reached across the table and took my hand. His wedding ring felt loose, like it didn't belong there as firmly as it used to. "Hey," he said softly, "I know I've been busy lately, but it's just temporary. Things will settle down." I looked at him, really looked at him, at the man I had built a life with, at the man who now moved through our home like someone balancing two versions of himself. "Caleb," I said quietly, "are we okay?" For a fraction of a second, his mask slipped, just enough. A flicker of something, guilt maybe, or fear. Then it was gone. "Of course we are," he said, squeezing my hand. "Why wouldn't we be?" I held his gaze. "Because something feels wrong," I wanted to say. "Because you smell like someone else. Because you come home at 3 a.m. and lie like it's second nature." But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I nodded. "Yeah," I murmured. "Of course." He leaned over and kissed my cheek, and that scent, her scent, lingered again in his hair. Later that night, I lay in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling. His breathing was steady. Too steady. The kind of rhythm people fake when they don't want to talk. The faucet was silent now, completely fixed. And yet, somehow, the house felt more broken than ever. I turned slightly, glancing at his nightstand. His phone sat there, face down. A small, ordinary object that now felt like the center of everything I didn't know. My heart beat harder. Not from panic, from clarity. Something had shifted inside me. I was no longer trying to convince myself everything was fine. I was starting to prepare for the truth. Thursday night, I met Ryan Kowalski at a bar we had been going to since our 20s. The place hadn't changed. Dark wood, low lighting, the smell of beer soaked into the walls like history. It was the kind of place where people didn't pretend to be anything other than what they were. That was exactly why I needed to be there. Ryan was already seated when I arrived, one arm draped over the back of the booth, a half-finished beer in front of him. At 6'4", broad-shouldered and solid in that grounded, steady way, he had always made chaos feel smaller just by existing. He looked up at me and frowned immediately. "You look exhausted, Ella." "Thanks," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "That's exactly what every woman wants to hear." "I'm serious," he replied. "What's going on?" I didn't ease into it. I told him everything. The late nights, the smell of perfume, Mrs. Fielder, the car, the phone, the subtle shifts, the feeling that something had been wrong for months, maybe longer. Ryan didn't interrupt. He just listened, his expression growing darker with every word. When I finished, he leaned back slowly. "How long?" he asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. 6 months, maybe more. "You don't sound unsure," he said. "I'm not," I admitted. "I just don't have proof." He nodded once. "You want proof?" "Yes." The word came out faster than I expected. Not emotional. Not shaky. Clear. Ryan studied me for a moment, then reached for his phone. "I know someone," he said. "Used to work homicide. Retired now. Does private investigation work. Infidelity cases, fraud, all that." I let out a slow breath. That's exactly what I need. The next morning, I met Leon Briggs at a small diner downtown. He looked like someone who had spent a lifetime seeing things people preferred to pretend didn't exist. Gray hair, lined face, eyes that didn't waste time on politeness. He slid into the booth across from me and got straight to it. Ryan filled me in, he said. Husband acting suspicious, late nights, possible affair. He tapped a pen against his notebook. How long you been married? 12 years. Kids? No. He nodded once, like that simplified something in his mind. All right, he continued. I'm going to be honest with you. What I do, it's not dramatic like in movies. It's slow, expensive, and most of the time, it confirms exactly what you already suspect. I held his gaze. I'm not here for comfort, I said. I'm here for the truth. A corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Good answer. He flipped open his notebook. I'll need his schedule, vehicle, workplace, and a recent photo. I reached into my bag and slid a picture across the table. It was from last Christmas. Caleb in a dark suit, smiling at the camera, one arm around my waist. I was wearing red, leaning into him, believing every inch of that moment. Leon glanced at it. Handsome guy, he said. They usually are. I didn't respond. How long before you find something, I asked. He shrugged lightly. If he's careful, could take weeks. If he's comfortable, he closed the notebook. Days. It took less than one. Saturday evening, my phone rang while I was finishing paperwork at the kitchen table. Ella, Leon's voice came through, steady but different this time. We need to talk. My stomach dropped. That was fast. I told you, he said. They get sloppy. Where? The diner. 1 hour. The drive there felt longer than any distance I had ever traveled. Every red light lasted too long. Every turn felt wrong. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, like if I loosened them, something inside me might fall apart before I was ready. When I walked into the diner, I saw him immediately. Same booth. A manila envelope sitting on the table in front of him. He didn't smile. That was all I needed to know. I slid into the seat across from him, my heart pounding hard enough to feel in my throat. He didn't waste time. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Then he pushed the envelope toward me. For a moment, I didn't move. Then I reached out, opened it, and everything changed. The photographs were clear, too clear. No room for doubt, no room for interpretation. Caleb getting into a sleek black car, driven by a woman with long dark hair and sharp features, younger than me, confident. Caleb and that same woman walking into a downtown hotel. Caleb and her in the parking lot. Kissing, not hesitant, not guilty, hungry. His hands in her hair, her fingers gripping his jacket like she didn't want to let go, like she had every right to be there. My breath caught. For a second, the world around me blurred, not because I didn't understand what I was seeing, but because I understood it perfectly. Who is she? I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. Tiffany Dunn, Leon said, 28, mortgage broker, works at Premier Financial, drives that black Mercedes you see there, lives in one of those luxury condos downtown. I stared at the photos. Same face, same man, but not the husband who had kissed me goodbye that morning. This version of Caleb looked alive, lighter, sharper, like the weight of 12 years had disappeared from his shoulders the moment he stepped into her world. How long? I asked. Leon leaned back slightly. I've only been watching since yesterday, he said, but this isn't new. The way they move together, that's familiarity, comfort. He paused. I'd say months, at least. Months. The word echoed in my head like a crack forming under pressure. There's more, he added. He reached into his pocket and placed a small recorder on the table. My stomach tightened. I picked up audio, he said. Parking lot. Clear enough. He pressed play. Caleb's voice filled the space between us. Laughing. Light. Free. God, Tiffany, you should see Ella when she's working, he said. She takes it so seriously, like the entire world's going to collapse if a pipe leaks. A woman's voice responded, smooth, amused. Poor thing probably thinks she's holding everything together. Caleb chuckled. She has no idea. Honestly, sometimes I think I could bring you home and she'd just offer you coffee and start talking about foundation cracks. They both laughed. The sound hit me harder than the photos. Not just betrayal. Humiliation. Casual. Easy. shared like a private joke. I reached forward and stopped the recording. "I've heard enough," I said. Silence settled between us. Heavy. Final. Leon didn't push, didn't offer comfort, just sat there, watching me with the kind of quiet understanding that came from seeing this moment happen too many times. "What do you want to do?" he asked after a while. I stared down at the photographs spread across the table, at the life I thought I had, at the man I thought I knew, and at the truth I could never unsee. "I don't know yet," I said, but something inside me had already begun to change. Not loudly, not dramatically, just decisively, like a crack in a foundation that had finally reached the surface. I drove home in silence, not the peaceful kind. The kind that feels like something inside you has been hollowed out, leaving only structure behind. The photo sat in the passenger seat, the envelope slightly open, like it was breathing, like it knew it had changed everything and didn't need to prove it again. At every red light, I kept my eyes forward. If I looked at them again, I was afraid I might break. And I didn't want to break in public. Not in a car, not in traffic, not where anyone could see me fall apart. Because strangely, I wasn't falling apart. Not yet. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. Perfect lawn, clean windows, the porch light still on from the night before. It was unsettling how normal everything looked when nothing was. I sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel, and asked myself a question I wasn't ready for. What did I expect this to feel like? Screaming? Crying? Rage? Instead, what I felt was clarity. Cold. Quiet. Sharp. Caleb was already home. I heard his voice from the living room as soon as I stepped inside. Casual, relaxed, like a man with nothing to hide. "Hey babe," he called. "You're back early." I slipped off my shoes slowly, steadying my breathing before walking in. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. The same phone. Face up this time. Interesting. "Finished early," I said. He glanced up, smiled, then patted the seat beside him. "Come sit." I walked over and sat down, close enough to feel the warmth of his body, close enough to smell her. That same faint perfume, subtle but unmistakable. "How was your day?" he asked, placing his phone down. "Productive," I replied. "Good," he nodded. "I might have to head out later again. Got a client who's being difficult." I watched his face carefully. Every movement, every blink, every tiny pause. The man sitting next to me was lying, not clumsily, not nervously, smoothly, effortlessly, like it had become part of who he was. "Caleb," I said softly. He turned to me, brows lifting slightly. "Yeah? Do you ever feel like," I paused, choosing my words carefully, "like we've changed?" Something shifted in his eyes, just slightly. "People change," he said. "That's normal." "That's not what I meant." He leaned back, studying me now. "What did you mean?" I held his gaze. "I mean, us." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled, giving a small, almost amused smile. "Ella," he said gently, "we've been married 12 years. Of course it's not the same as it was in the beginning." "I'm not asking for the beginning," I replied. "I'm asking if we're still here." His expression softened, convincingly so. "Of course we are," he said, reaching for my hand. "You're overthinking. You always do that when work gets stressful." There it was. The deflection. The quiet shift of responsibility. I let him take my hand. Let him squeeze it. Let him perform reassurance. Like a man who believed it would be enough. "Yeah," I murmured. "Maybe I am." We had dinner together that night. He told me about a client who kept changing contract terms. I nodded in the right places, asked the right questions, played my role perfectly. Because now I knew something he didn't. I knew the truth. And more importantly, I knew that he didn't know I knew. After dinner, we moved to the living room. A movie played in the background, something neither of us was actually watching. Caleb sat close, one arm resting behind me, occasionally brushing my shoulder. A familiar gesture, one that used to comfort me. Now it felt rehearsed, like muscle memory, without meaning. His phone buzzed. Once. Twice. 3 times. Each time his eyes flicked toward it. Each time he waited a little longer before checking it, trying to seem casual, trying to seem uninterested. But I saw it. Every time. "Go ahead," I said lightly. "You can check it." He hesitated, then smiled. "Just work stuff." Of course it was. He picked it up, glanced at the screen, and for a split second, his entire expression changed. Not panic, not fear. Something softer, warmer. A smile that didn't belong to me. He typed quickly, then set the phone back down, face down. Later that night, we lay in bed, backs turned slightly toward each other. The space between us felt wider than the mattress. His breathing was steady again. Too steady. I stared into the darkness, my mind replaying everything. The photos. The recording. His laughter. "Sometimes I think I could bring you home." A sharp ache moved through my chest. Not loud. Not explosive. Just deep. I turned my head slightly, looking at the outline of his back. This man, this stranger, this person who had shared my life for 12 years, who had built a home with me, who had stood beside me in front of friends and family and promised, and now laughed about me like I was a joke. I swallowed hard. Not tears, not yet, just the weight of it. What did I miss, I wondered. When did it start? Was there a moment I could have changed? The questions came quietly, one after another. Not to blame him, not to excuse him, but because that's what you do when something breaks. You look for the crack. You try to understand it, even when you know it won't fix anything. Hours passed. Sleep never came, but something else did. Something quieter, stronger, a shift. I felt it settle inside me like a decision that hadn't fully formed yet, but was already real. The pain was still there, sharp, immediate. But beneath it, there was something colder, clearer. I was no longer the woman trying to understand what was happening. I was becoming the woman who would decide what happened next. By Monday, I stopped reacting and started observing. It was subtle at first, just a shift in where my attention went. Instead of listening to Caleb's words, I watched his timing. Instead of believing his explanations, I tracked his patterns. And once I did that, everything became obvious. He left earlier than usual, came home later than necessary, took calls outside, smiled at his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. He had stopped being careful. Not because he was smarter than me, but because he thought I was still the same woman, the one who trusted without question. That morning, something small gave me more than all the photos had. Caleb's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while he was upstairs getting dressed. He had forgotten it. That alone was unusual. But what mattered was the preview. Just one line. "Last night was perfect. I miss you already. T." My fingers tightened around my coffee mug. I didn't pick up the phone. Didn't scroll. Didn't invade. I didn't need to, because that single message told me everything. Not just that it was still happening, but that it was emotional, ongoing, real. Not a mistake, not a phase, a relationship. When Caleb came downstairs, he grabbed his phone immediately, checked it, smiled, then looked at me like nothing had changed. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said easily, "just work." Of course it was. Later that afternoon, I met Leon again. Same diner, same booth. But this time, I wasn't the woman asking for truth. I already had it. "I want more information," I told him. He studied me for a moment. "You're handling this differently than most." "How so?" "Most people come in here angry," he said, "or broken." I replied. "Now I'm thinking." He nodded slowly. "What do you want to know?" "Her routine, where she goes, who she is outside of him." Leon leaned back. "I've already started digging. Tiffany Dunn isn't just some random woman." "I didn't think she was." "She's got a reputation," he continued. "Young, ambitious, likes expensive things, and she has a pattern." "What kind of pattern?" He met my eyes. "Married men." Something inside me went still. "Caleb isn't the first?" I asked. "Not even close." That night, I sat across from Caleb at dinner again. Another perfect performance. Another flawless lie. I might be late tomorrow, he said casually. Got a big listing presentation. I nodded. Of course you do. He smiled. Hey, he added, reaching for my hand again. I know I've been distant. Things are just hectic right now. I looked at our hands, at the ring on his finger, at the way it no longer seemed to belong there. It's okay, I said softly. And for the first time since all of this began, I meant something different than what he heard. 2 days later, things escalated. Not because of him, because of his family. We had dinner at his parents' house Wednesday night. Diane greeted us at the door, her smile sharp and practiced. Ella, she said, air kissing my cheek. You look tired. Long week, I replied. Of course, she said, glancing briefly at Caleb. Some of us have more demanding lives than others. There it was. Subtle. Deliberate. I smiled politely and walked inside. Dinner started normally. Too normally. Then, halfway through the meal, Diane set her fork down and looked at me. You know, she said, marriage takes attention. I paused. Of course it does. And presence, she added. Men need to feel valued, desired. Caleb shifted slightly in his seat. Mom. I'm just saying, she continued smoothly. When a man starts drifting, it's usually because something at home isn't fulfilling him. There it was. Not subtle anymore. Direct. Calculated. I felt Vanessa's eyes on me from across the table. Waiting. Watching. Judging. I set my fork down carefully. Are you saying Caleb is drifting? I asked calmly. Diane smiled. I'm saying, she replied, that relationships don't fall apart overnight. Silence settled over the table. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Caleb didn't defend me. Didn't interrupt. Didn't correct her. He just sat there. And in that moment, something inside me clicked into place. This wasn't just betrayal. It was alignment. He had already shifted away from me, not just in action, but in loyalty. After dinner in the car, I turned to him. That was interesting, I said. What was? He asked, eyes on the road. Your mother. He sighed. She didn't mean anything by it. Of course she did. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. She's just old-fashioned. No, I said quietly. She's observant. That got his attention. He glanced at me. What's that supposed to mean? I held his gaze for a second, then looked away. Nothing, I said. But it wasn't nothing. Not anymore. That night, I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel confused. I didn't even feel angry. I felt focused, because now I understood something clearly. Caleb wasn't slipping. He had already chosen, and everyone around him, his family, his world, his new life, was quietly supporting that choice. So I made one of my own. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to confront him blindly, and I wasn't going to fall apart in front of people who were already preparing to blame me. No. If this marriage was ending, it would end with the truth fully exposed, and I would be the one holding it. The lowest point didn't come with shouting. It didn't come with confrontation. It came quietly, on a Thursday night, in a house that suddenly felt too big for one person who finally saw everything clearly. Caleb told me he'd be working late again. He said it the same way he always did now. Effortless, practiced, almost bored by the routine of lying. I might not be back until late, he added, grabbing his keys. Don't wait up. I won't, I replied. And for once, that wasn't a lie. I watched him leave through the front window, watched his car disappear down the street, and then the house went still. Not peaceful. Empty. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't pick up a book, didn't distract myself. Instead, I walked slowly into the kitchen and sat down at the table. The same table where we had eaten dinner together just hours before. The same table where he had smiled at me, touched my hand, lied without hesitation. I pulled out the envelope, laid the photos out in front of me, one by one, carefully, like evidence, because that's what they were. There they were again, Caleb and Tiffany, laughing, touching, kissing, living. Like I didn't exist. Like 12 years didn't exist. like the life we built together was just something he had outgrown. I stared at one photo longer than the others, the one where she had her hand in his hair, and he was looking at her like she was the only thing in the world. I tried to remember the last time he looked at me that way. I couldn't. That was when it hit. Not the betrayal. Not even the humiliation, but something deeper, something harder to admit. He wasn't just cheating. He was happy. The realization settled slowly, like something sinking to the bottom of deep water. I leaned back in my chair, my chest tightening, because that truth changed everything. If he had been conflicted, guilty, torn, there would still be something to fight for. But this was different. He had already stepped into another life. And in that life, he wasn't missing me. My throat tightened. And for the first time since all of this began, I broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. Tears slipped down my face before I even realized I was crying. I covered my mouth with my hand like I needed to contain it. Like even alone, I didn't want to make noise. Because somehow, crying made it real in a way thinking didn't. I wasn't enough, I whispered. The words came out before I could stop them. Soft. Fragile. Dangerous. I closed my eyes tightly. Because that one thought, could destroy everything if I let it grow. What did she have that I didn't? Was I too boring? Too practical? Too predictable? I thought about her. Younger. Flashy. Exciting. The kind of woman who turned heads. The kind of woman who made men feel alive. And then I thought about myself. Work boots. Checklists. Early mornings. Responsibility, stability. The comparison was cruel, but it was honest. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I did everything right, I said out loud. My voice shook. I stayed. I worked. I built this life with him. The words echoed in the empty kitchen. No one answered. I walked into the living room, then back into the hallway, then upstairs, like I was searching for something, or maybe trying to escape the version of myself that had just said I wasn't enough. I stopped in front of the bedroom mirror, looked at myself, really looked. No makeup, tired eyes, hair pulled back without care. A woman who had been living inside a routine so long, she forgot what it meant to feel desired. Is this what he sees? I asked softly. The reflection didn't answer. I sank onto the edge of the bed. The same bed we had shared for 12 years. The same bed he would come back to after being with her. A sharp wave of something hit me then. Not sadness, not even pain. Something darker, something heavier. Disgust. I stood up immediately, my skin crawling. The thought of him lying beside me, touching me. After touching her, it twisted something deep in my chest. I can't do this, I whispered. And for the first time, I meant it. The illusion was gone. Completely. There was no more maybe. No more what if. No more hope hiding in denial. This wasn't a rough patch. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't something I could fix by trying harder. This was the end. I sat there in the quiet, letting that truth settle. Letting it break me where it needed to. Because I understood something now that I hadn't before. You can't repair something that the other person has already abandoned. The tears slowed. My breathing steadied. And slowly, something inside me shifted. Not back to who I was before. That version of me was gone. Into something else. Something quieter. Stronger. I wiped my face. Stood up. And looked at myself in the mirror again. This time, I didn't see a woman who wasn't enough. I saw a woman who had finally seen the truth. And truth changes everything. Downstairs, the house was still silent, but it didn't feel hollow anymore. It felt like a space waiting for something new. I walked back into the kitchen, gathered the photos, placed them neatly back into the envelope. Because this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the moment I stopped lying to myself. And somewhere between the tears and the silence, I realized something important. I wasn't losing him. He had already lost me. He just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I didn't wake up feeling broken. I woke up Clear, not healed, not okay, but steady. Like something inside me had finally aligned. Caleb was still asleep when I got out of bed, on his back this time. One arm stretched across my side of the mattress, like he still had a claim to the space I no longer felt belonged to him. I stood there for a moment looking at him, at the man who had become a stranger without ever leaving the house. Then I turned away. Downstairs, I made coffee. Same routine, same motions, but everything felt different, not heavier, just sharper, more defined. His phone buzzed again, on the counter. Face up? This time, I didn't hesitate. I picked it up. The message was short. Last night meant everything. When are you leaving her? T. My chest didn't tighten. My hands didn't shake. I just read it. Once. Twice. Then I set the phone back down exactly where it had been. So that was it. Not just an affair. A plan. When Caleb came downstairs, he moved like he always did. Casual. Relaxed. Completely unaware that the ground beneath him had already shifted. Morning, he said, grabbing his phone. Morning. He checked it. Paused. Then typed something quickly. I watched him. Carefully. You heading out early? He asked. Yes, I said. Full schedule. Same here, he replied. Might be late again tonight. Of course you will. He didn't catch the tone. Didn't even look up. After he left, I called Leon. I need everything, I said. He didn't ask what I meant. Already working on it, he replied. We met that afternoon. And what he told me changed the direction of everything. Tiffany isn't just reckless, Leon said, sliding a folder across the table. She's calculated. I opened it. Photos, messages, notes, patterns. She targets men like your husband, he continued. Stable, married, financially secure. I looked up. So this isn't love. Leon shook his head. No, it's strategy. My stomach didn't drop. It didn't need to, because suddenly everything made sense. The timing. The intensity, the way Caleb had changed so quickly, the way she had inserted herself into his life. He's not special, Leon added. He's just next. I leaned back slowly, letting that settle. Does she know about his finances? I asked. Leon's expression shifted. That's the interesting part, he said. She probably thinks he's more successful than he actually is. What do you mean? He's been overextending, Leon replied, spending beyond his means, taking risks to maintain an image. I frowned. That doesn't sound like him. It didn't, Leon said, until recently. And just like that, another piece clicked into place. Caleb wasn't just cheating. He was transforming, trying to become someone else, someone who fit into her world. Is there more? I asked. Leon hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. He slid another document toward me, her messages. I scanned the page, and there it was, clear, unfiltered. He's going to leave her soon. I just need to be patient. She has no idea. It's almost sad. Once it's done, everything changes. I stared at the words, not shocked, not devastated, just certain. This wasn't something I could fix. This wasn't something worth saving. This was a game, and I had been the only one not playing. I closed the folder slowly. When? I asked. Leon tilted his head. When what? When do they think this is happening? Soon, he said. From what I've seen, they're already planning the exit. I nodded. Good. Leon studied me. You're taking this very calmly. I met his eyes. No, I said quietly. I'm taking this very seriously. Because something had changed. Completely. I wasn't reacting anymore. I wasn't trying to understand him. I wasn't asking what I did wrong. I was deciding what I would do next. And for the first time since this started, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. That night, Caleb came home late again. Same smell, same routine, same lies. But this time, I didn't look for answers. I didn't search for signs. I didn't question anything because I already had everything I needed. As he spoke, I watched him, not as a wife, but as someone observing the end of something. And in that moment, I realized something important. He thought he was leaving me, but he was wrong. I was already gone. I just hadn't told him yet. I didn't confront him right away. That's what he expected. That's what most people expect. Tears, shouting, accusations thrown across rooms like broken glass. But I had already cried, already broken, already rebuilt something quieter and far more dangerous. Clarity. The following Friday, Caleb told me he had another client event. I nodded, like always. Have a good time, I said. You too, he replied, barely looking at me. That was the thing about lies. After a while, they stopped trying to be convincing. As soon as he left, I picked up my phone. Ryan, I said when he answered. It's time. We met downtown an hour later. Same upscale bar Leon had mentioned. Glass walls, loud music. The kind of place where people wanted to be seen. Perfect. Ryan leaned against the wall beside me, arms crossed. You sure about this? He asked quietly. I looked through the window, and there they were, Caleb and Tiffany, sitting close, too close. Her hand resting on his arm like it belonged there. His body angled toward her like nothing else in the room existed. They're not even hiding it, Ryan muttered. No, I said softly. They're not. We went inside. I didn't rush, didn't storm over. I walked like I belonged there, because I did. I positioned myself where I could see them clearly, watched, observed, documented, not with a camera this time, with memory, because this moment I would never forget. She laughed at something he said, leaned into him. He touched her face, gently, intimately, like he used to touch mine. Then he kissed her, right there. In the middle of the room, no hesitation, no shame. Something inside me settled completely. No anger, no jealousy, no confusion, just finality. Now? Ryan asked. I nodded. I walked toward them. Calm, steady, unstoppable. Caleb. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through everything. He froze, turned, and for the first time since this began, I saw it. Real fear. Ella, he said, standing up too quickly. What are you? I was nearby, I replied calmly. Thought I'd say hello. Tiffany's eyes flicked between us. Sharp. Assessing. Not guilty. Just calculating. This is, Caleb started. Tiffany, I finished for him. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. I looked at her. Really looked at her. Younger. Beautiful. Confident and completely unsurprised. So, I said lightly, this is the client you've been working so hard for. A few people nearby turned their heads. Not obvious, but enough. Ella, can we? Caleb stepped closer. No, I said softly. He stopped, because something in my voice told him this wasn't a conversation he could control. I reached into my bag, pulled out the envelope, and placed it gently on the table. Everything you've been doing, I said, looking at him, is in there. His face drained of color. Tiffany didn't move, didn't panic, didn't speak, but her posture shifted slightly, carefully. I'm not here to make a scene, I continued, and I'm definitely not here to fight over a man who made his choice months ago. My voice stayed calm, even, controlled. I just wanted you to know, I added, that I know. The silence stretched. You were going to tell me eventually, right? I asked. Caleb opened his mouth, closed it. Then, I was waiting for the right time. Of course he was. I gave a small nod. Of course you were. Then I looked at Tiffany, and for the first time, I spoke directly to her. You might want to read that, I said, tapping the envelope lightly. It has more than just pictures. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Curiosity, not concern. Yet. Then I turned back to Caleb. You don't have to come home tonight, I said. I'll have your things packed by tomorrow. And that was it. No yelling. No crying. No begging. I turned and walked away. Ryan followed me outside. Neither of us spoke until we reached the car. Damn, he said finally. That was clean. I looked straight ahead. "It's over," I said. But it wasn't just over, it was finished. Over the next few days, everything unfolded exactly the way truth always does, quietly. Then, all at once, Caleb called, texted, showed up at the house. "I can explain," he said. "You don't need to," I replied. "This isn't what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like." Then came the shift, the one he didn't expect. Tiffany found out, not from me. From the information Leon had gathered. About Caleb's finances, his overextensions, the risks, the image he had built that wasn't entirely real. And suddenly, the dynamic changed. She stopped calling, stopped showing up, stopped being invested, because what she wanted wasn't him. It was what she thought he represented. And when that illusion cracked, she walked away. Just like he had walked away from me, only faster, colder, without hesitation. I heard about it from Leon, then from Ryan, then, eventually, from Caleb himself. "She just left," he said, standing in my doorway days later, confused, disoriented, alone. I looked at him and felt nothing. "Yeah," I said quietly. "That tends to happen." He stood there, waiting for sympathy, for anger, for something. But there was nothing left to give, because while his world was just starting to fall apart, mine had already rebuilt itself without him. "I'm filing for divorce," I said. And this time, there was no hesitation in my voice. The house felt different after he left. Not empty, just honest. The first morning I woke up alone, I expected the silence to hurt. Instead, it felt clean. No tension in the air. No second-guessing every word. No quiet suspicion sitting between breaths. Just stillness. The kind that lets you hear your own thoughts again. Caleb came back once more, a week later. Not to argue, not to fight, just to try. "I made a mistake," he said, standing in the doorway like a man who no longer knew where he belonged. "I didn't invite him in." "I know," I replied. "I can fix this," he added quickly. "We can fix this." I looked at him for a long moment, at the man I had once built a life around, at the man who now looked smaller somehow, like everything that had once made him impressive had been stripped down to something ordinary. "You already tried to fix it," I said quietly. He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You fixed it for yourself," I continued. "You found something new, something exciting, something easier." His jaw tightened. "That's not—" "It is," I cut in, still calm. "And when that didn't work out, now you're here." Silence stretched between us, heavy, final. "I chose you," he said after a moment. "In the end, I chose you." I almost smiled. "No," I said softly, "you didn't." He blinked, confused. "I chose me." He didn't come back after that. The divorce process wasn't dramatic. No screaming. No courtroom theatrics. Just paperwork. Signatures. The quiet dismantling of a life that had taken 12 years to build. Some people expected me to be bitter. Others expected me to be broken. I was neither. I went back to work. Inspections. Foundations, structures, things that made sense again. There's something grounding about standing in a half-built house, pointing out flaws before they become disasters, about telling people the truth before they invest in something that won't hold. One afternoon, months later, I found myself in a kitchen almost identical to mine. Same sink, same faucet, same slow, steady drip. The homeowner laughed nervously. "It's probably nothing, right?" I looked at the leak, then at her, and for a moment, I saw myself, months ago, standing in a house that looked perfect on the surface, ignoring what I already felt deep down. "It's small," I said. Then I paused. "But it's not nothing." She nodded slowly. And I could tell she understood more than I had said. That's the thing about problems. They rarely start big. They start quietly, subtly, easy to ignore, until they're not. That night, I went home to a house that was finally mine. Not ours, mine. I made dinner. sat at the table, and for the first time in a long time, I felt complete. Not because everything had gone right, but because I had stopped holding on to something that had already ended. If there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's this. Love doesn't fail in one moment. It fails in 100 small choices, in silence, in avoidance, in the slow decision to stop showing up for the person who trusted you. And the hardest truth, you can't fix something alone that was built by two people, but you can walk away from it. You can choose yourself. You can rebuild. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not fight for what's breaking, but finally let it go. Because some leaks aren't meant to be repaired. They're meant to show you it's time to leave the house.